Welcome everyone to Fundamentals of Kabbalah and Chassidut. Today we're starting a new series, Secrets of the Cycles of Seven and Shabbat. And we are beginning this series as we are in the beginning of the process of Sfirat HaOmer. That is the inspiration for wanting to do this type of teaching right now and learning, is about the cycles of seven, because as we'll discuss shortly, we are in the process of counting 7 times 7 weeks, 49 days, from the day after Pesach until Shavuot. So this is a self-enclosed cycle of 7 weeks. Each week, of course, is 7 days, so 7 times 7 are the 49 days of counting the Omer. We'll return to that shortly. But the general principle that we always employ when discussing any subject, any concept or idea, is where is the source in the Torah? And especially, where is the first time a concept or idea or name is mentioned in the Torah? So if we want to understand cycles of 7, so we will now look at the first place where it appears in the Torah. And this, of course, is the 7th day of creation. And I'm going to read it now in Hebrew and translate it. And we'll see that the number 7 and the name Shabbat appears for the first time. And here, actually, Shabbat is referred to more as Yom HaShvi'i, the 7th day. And we'll see that the word Shabbat appears, but more as a description of ceasing work. In this case, it was God who was resting from the work that had been done in the 6 days of creation. So here we're reading from Bereshit, the 2nd chapter, the first verse. Vayechulu hashamayim va'aretz v'chol tzeva'am. And the works of heaven and earth were, and all the hosts were finished, were completed. Yachal Elohim b'yom hashvi'i malachto asher asa. So here is the first mention of the number 7. And God completed on the 7th day the work that he had done. Vayishbot, here is the first reference to Shabbat, but here it's like a verb. He ceased to work. Vayishbot b'yom hashvi'i, and he rested, he ceased from work, he rested on the 7th day. Mikol malachto asher asa, from all of the work that he had done. V'yavorech Elokim et yom hashvi'i v'yakadesh oto. And God blessed the 7th day, and he sanctified it, he made it holy. Kivo shavat mikol malachto, because on this day God rested from all of his work, asher bara Elokim lasot, that God had made to do. So here we see, again, this is the beginning of the Torah, but nonetheless, on the 7th day, the first appearance of the number 7 appears, the first appearance of the word Shabbat, the first time the idea of holiness, Vayikadesh oto. We also have Vayivorech Elokim, that God blessed, but already that word had been used with previous creation. So this is our main source that we are basing the whole idea of the cycles of 7, because here God creates the cycle of 7. Now, we're going to go through all the different cycles of 7 in our tradition. And we'll see that in a sense, they're all based on the first appearance, the 7th day. And God blessed the 7th day and he made it holy. And so when we talk about cycles of 7, we're really talking about God's divine cycle that he engraved, embedded in creation. And of course, from this, we get the mitzvah to observe the Shabbat, because as the sages said, the expression is kol shvi'in chavivin. All 7s are beloved, are precious. And that's because God established the cycle of 7. So when we attune our lives to the different cycles of 7, which we are going to explore right now, we are getting in tune with a divine cycle. So this is a very, very basic idea when approaching the idea of cycles of 7. When we look at cycles in general, some of them we can see that there are astronomical reasons for them, such as the Jewish calendar is a lunar calendar. Well, there is an astronomical reality of a cycle of a month. That is between the new moon, and the new moon reaches its apex in the middle of the month, and then it becomes smaller until it renews itself once again in a new month. So that we could understand that that cycle has an astronomical basis. The same thing with the solar year. The 365 days of a solar year is the amount of time it takes for the Earth to circle the sun. So that has an astronomical, but we'll see when we go through the different cycles of 7, some of them are not obvious at all that there should be such a cycle as 7, like the week. The whole concept of the week is really based on the source in the Torah. We could possibly say that a month could be divided into 4 sections, even though a month is more like 29.25 days long, not 7 times 4, but still there's a connection. Obviously, God had this in mind when he established the week, but basically we could say that there would only be a cycle of the month, that people would not relate to what we call a week, 7 days. And that's based on the biblical source. So let's now go through 7 cycles of 7. And we'll see when the sages said, Kol shvi'in chavivin, all 7s are precious. We'll see it manifest in cycles of time. Later, we will do a general survey of all, not all, but many, many, many places in Jewish law, Jewish tradition, Jewish text, where the number 7 appears over and over and over again. But like any series, we have to start slowly and add to the information and the understandings and the concepts. So let's start with the 7 cycles of 7. So the first one we just discussed, based on the 7th day of creation, that we have a week. And for those who live an observant Jewish lifestyle, our entire life revolves around Shabbat. That, in fact, the way we call the days of the week in a Torah way is Yom Rishon b'Shabbat. the first day of the week, but here the word week is Shabbat. Yom Sheni shel Shabbat. Yom Shlishi shel Shabbat. Everything revolves around the Shabbat. And as I said, those who live the lifestyle of observing the Shabbat, well, already on Tuesday and Wednesday, even before, it's when are we doing shopping for Shabbat? Who are our guests on Shabbat? Are we invited out for Shabbat? Or let's say someone is traveling. So all the travel plans have to be made around where are we going to be for Shabbat, especially if you're on a longer summer vacation and you have to map out different places that you want to be. Well, ultimately, it's going to revolve about where are we going to be for Shabbat. So the Shabbat is of course the centerpiece of a Jewish lifestyle. And as we already said, that the Shabbat is blessed, and it's the first time that the concept of holiness is introduced in the Torah, and that is with Shabbat. So in a certain way, Shabbat is the headquarters, is the prime example, the paradigm of holiness. Of course, in the series, most of it will be dealing with understanding the Shabbat, how to get the most out of Shabbat, and understanding it from the practical to the mystical. So that's our first cycle, is Shabbat. The second cycle is, as I mentioned already, Sfirat HaOmer. Now, this is also a self-contained cycle of 7 times 7. And this is Torah mandated. And if it wasn't, we wouldn't necessarily think of creating such a cycle. But it turns out that we received the Torah on the 50th day after leaving Mitzrayim. We start counting the night after the first day of Pesach. And we're told 50 days later, we received the Torah in Sinai. So the two holidays are the bookends. They frame this cycle of 7 weeks. So we had 7 days makes a week. And now we have a cycle in weeks themselves of the 7 weeks. And Shavuot is from the word Shavua, which could mean a week, or also Shavua means an oath. And here, when we entered into the covenant with God, with the Torah, is when we said Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will hear, meaning we will come to understand. Even before we understand, we're in a sense taking an oath. We're promising that we'll do the Torah, even before we understand what it is. That is an indication of our trust in God. So this is the 7 weeks of Sfirat HaOmer. And of course, the deep spiritual work that is happening in Sfirat HaOmer is when we combine and permute the different sfirot of each day. The 10 sfirot are many times broken up into the 3 higher sfirot. Those, we'll call it, of the intellect, either Keter, Chachma, and Bina, or Chachma, Bina, and Dat. And the 7 lower sfirot are those that relate to the emotions and the behavioral aspect of a human being. And we're told that during the 7 weeks, the main spiritual work is what's called Tikkun Hamidot, is improving, fixing, repairing, healing our personality, our characteristics. These are called Tikkun Hamidot, and it happens through combining the Sfirot. So the first week of Sfirat Omer is, the whole week is of Chesed. The second week is Gevura, and so forth, until the last week is Malchut. Okay, so that is the cycle of weeks. Now, the next one is probably the least recognized, and that is that there is a cycle of 7 in relationship to months. When we look in the Torah, the 3 pilgrimage holidays, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, are all happening in the first 7 months of the year. And many times in the Torah, when the holidays are discussed, these holidays create a cycle. At the time of the Torah, we didn't have Hanukkah, we didn't have Purim. Tu B'Shvat is not mentioned. And so the main holidays that are mentioned in the Torah are Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. And then in the 7th month is again Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And following Sukkot is Shmini Atzeret / Simchat Torah. But all of those holidays are happening in the first 7 months of the year. So that is, in concept, there's also the cycle of the holidays. But this is actually translated into a number of different laws as to when someone finds a lost object and has to try to return it to the owner. So there is a cycle of 7 months in which this process is done. The same thing with making certain oaths and promises that are taken very seriously. Also, there is a cycle of 7 in which some of these oaths need to be fulfilled. So here, even though conceptually we can talk about 7 months, but it gets translated into Jewish law as well. Now we go to years. So now we've had 3 cycles of 7 days, weeks, and months. Now we go to years. And here again, we have the mitzvah in the Torah in the book of Leviticus, Vayikra, Parshat Bahar, the idea of the sabbatical year, that we work for 6 years and then we rest on the 7th. It's called the Shemitah year. And this again, this is like the 7 days. There's no particular reason in an astronomical sense that there should be a cycle of 7. This is God mandated. And of course, it's teaching us that there is something special about the number 7 and cycles of 7. So every 7th year, this last year was a Shemitah year here in Israel. We rest the land, and at the time of the Torah, where it was an agrarian society, well, just like in the week, we base everything around Shabbat. So in an agrarian society, in a sense, everything is based around the 7-year cycle. Because when we rest the land, we have to make plans well in advance to make sure that we have enough food stored away and everything that implies. So the Shemitah year in the Torah is actually called a Shabbat Lashem. It's a Shabbat for God, even though it applies to us and it's our livelihood and it's the land that we live on. But since it's mandated by God for our good, of course, it's called a Shabbat Lashem. From that, of course, this is the whole concept of what's called the sabbatical year, especially in universities, where professors get a sabbatical year. But it applies in many other areas also, the idea of a sabbatical year. But again, this is not a given or an intuitive, logical breakdown of how years should play themselves out. It's a divine cycle. That's the fourth. The fifth is now, just like we have 7 times 7 weeks, we have 7 times 7 years. And then the 50th year is the Jubilee year. And of course, the 50th Jubilee year corresponds to the Shavuot, the 50th day on which we received the Torah. Excuse me. So this again is a divine cycle, 7 times 7. And the 50th is the Jubilee year, which is another year of resting the land. It's actually 2 years in a row that the land is rested. All, we'll call them indentured servants, are freed, and loans are canceled, and everyone returns to their inheritance. This is a subject we can't delve into, but in the time of when the Torah was given and when we lived in Eretz Yisrael, and the land was divided between the tribes and among the families, well, these holdings of land were considered very, very important. And so when someone would sell their land, it really was only, excuse me, for a 50-year period. And at the time of the Jubilee, it would revert to the original owners. Again, this is a subject too complex to get into right now. So that is our 5th cycle of 7. The 6th one is in thousands of years. And this follows the same pattern of 6 days you shall work, and on the 7th day you shall rest. 6 years you should work the land, and the 7th you should rest the land, the Shemitah. And here we're told that history plays itself out in 6,000 years. We'll discuss shortly what that is based on. But according to our tradition, this cycle of history will last for 6,000 years. And the 7,000th is the Messianic era. But here we see 3 different times a cycle of 6, followed by Shabbat, the Shemitah, and the Messianic era. So that is now 6 cycles. And the 7th is a very, very mystical, symbolic concept that after the Messianic era, then we have what's called the world to come. And one of the ways that it is symbolically referred to is a time of 49,000 Jubilee years, which is symbolic of an eternal, infinite state of peace and unity of human consciousness and the Creator and God. So that, again, a very symbolic language of 49,000 Jubilee years. So that is the 7th cycle. And they're all, of course, based on 7. So what we can get from this is that obviously that God is teaching us through the Torah the divine cycle of 7 and how we are supposed to and how we benefit from being in tune with that cycle. So now let's go back to something I just mentioned, and we're going to delve into it a little bit deeper, is that we see that in 3 very, very important cycles of 7, It's based really on 6 and 1. 6 days of work and then Shabbat, 6 years of work and then Shemitah, 6,000 years of history, and then the Messianic era. So let's just understand these kind of connections. So we'll start with excuse me, the menorah. The menorah, 7-branch candelabrum, and it's obvious the number 7 here. But we're going to see just very, very simply is that the menorah has a central column or shaft, and on each side there are 3. So 3 and 3, of course, is 6. These represent the 6 days of the week, and the middle one represents Shabbat, which is very, very similar to what we discussed of Shabbat being the central focus of a Jewish lifestyle. But we can also relate this to 6 years of work and the Shemitah year in the middle, and 6,000 years of history and the Messianic era. So that is a very, very important manifestation of the number 7, that in ancient times, the menorah was the main symbol of the Jewish people. And in fact, this picture, which I'm showing you, is the official emblem of the state of Israel, is the menorah. Now, one of the things we're taught about the menorah is that it was made from 1 block of gold. And the 7, so in a sense, this represents plurality of manifest creation in all its different forms. And yet it was made from 1 block of gold. So this indicates the unity between God's oneness that is behind all reality and the plurality of the world, the phenomenon of the world, the stimuli of the world, the existence of such a manifold creation. So in our day, for many, many people, the Magen David is the main symbol. And you don't see that many people wearing, pendants with menorahs on them, but you do see the Star of David, the Magen David, everywhere, including, of course, the flag of Israel. And here we see a very, very beautiful thing, is that the basic symbolism and even the formation of a Magen David is very similar to the menorah. So here I'm just showing a Magen David. And so just like the menorah has a central shaft, so the Magen David has a center space here, a hexagon. And it has 6 smaller triangles. And so here we see the first 7 Hebrew letters. And this represents the first day of creation, the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, and the 6 days of creation. And the middle is the letter Zion for the 7th day, Shabbat. So very similar, even though it looks very different, but the concept behind the Magen David is really patterned almost in the same way as the menorah. And here also the idea of the menorah being made from 1 block of gold. So here you see that there are actually 6 smaller triangles. And then you have the 2 large interlocking triangles. But the main thing, and really the spiritual concept behind it, it's one form. In other words, all these different parts are part of one message, and that is the oneness of God. And here you have the triangle going up, so that represents the soul, spirituality, divinity, the heavens, and the triangle come down represents the body, the earth, physicality, matter. So here, but it's one form. It becomes one form because behind all of that, the different manifestations of God's oneness is the oneness of God, which it holds the whole thing together. So now, because we want to go back to sources here. So I mentioned before that we have a tradition that this cycle of history will last for 6,000 years. So the question is, where do we see that in the Torah? Where is that alluded to or hinted to? It's not mentioned explicitly. And so it's actually learned from the first verse of the Torah. Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In that verse, the letter Aleph appears 6 times. One of the meanings of Aleph is Elef, 1,000. And so the sages, when we look at the Torah is the blueprint of creation. And especially the first verse of the Torah is the paradigm of the blueprint of all the physical universe and the spiritual universes. And so here, I'll show you. This is the first verse in the Torah. Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. Here you see bolded are the 6 times that the letter Aleph appears in the first verse. And since, as I said, this is the paradigm, the model, the prototype of all creation, so they learned that the appearance of 6 Alephs tells us that this cycle of history will last for 6,000 years. Okay, so while we're looking at this, we're also going to see, we've talked about how 7 is really made up of 6 and 1. And here also in the first verse of the Torah, we see this very closely. One second. We see this very closely. If you look at the first word, Bereshit, so Bereshit has 6 letters. So here already in the first word of the Torah is embedded the 6 days of creation, right here. But if you count the words in the first verse, you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And this is the 6 days of work, but when it plays itself out in full, it includes the Shabbat. And even one step deeper is in the word Bereshit, you have the letters Yira, Shabbat. See the Yud, the Resh, and the Aleph is Yira. And the remaining letters, the Shin, the Bet, and the Tav is Shabbat. Yira, Shabbat can be read the awe of Shabbat or Ya'er, which means the shining, the enlightenment, the light of Shabbat. And this idea that Shabbat is found, is permuted in the first word of the Torah. So in the beloved song that we sing at Kabbalah Shabbat, Lecha Dodi, we say, Sof ma'aseh b'machshava techila. that Shabbat is the end of deed, meaning the end of the creative divine process, but it is the first in thought, because already in the first word of the Torah is Shabbat. And we actually learn, and we're going to get into this much deeper when we delve into the depths of Shabbat, is that before creation, before there's time and there's space and there's a world, only the infinite light of God. So that's explained that state of the infinite light of Shabbat is, the infinite light of God is Shabbat. That was the state of godliness. Godliness was in a state of rest, a state of peace. There was no creation. There was no creative process that brought creation into being. Everything was in a state of perfect, eternal, blissful, peaceful Shabbat. Okay, now I want to go back to the Magen David and explain. We just said that before creation, there was nothing but the essence, the light, the energy of God. And the Arizal explains that for God to create a physical material universe, there needed to be what's called Tzimtzum, a contraction. And this contraction is, in a sense, from our perspective. We're taught that from God's perspective, in the essence of God, there's no contraction whatsoever. But from our perspective, there is. And so the Magen David is a very useful metaphor to understanding the Tzimtzum. So there's two ways, because this is metaphorical. The two ways to understand the Tzimtzum is, first, we're just going to imagine that this is infinity. We're going to forget all of this for right now. All that exists in the essence of the infinite light of God is, as it were, here. And so the Tzimtzum, the contraction, means that from here, God contracts outward. And that's symbolized by these 6 triangles. And then in the middle is left what's called the Chalal HaPanui, a seemingly empty space. Though we're taught in Kabbalah and Chassidut that nothing can be without what's called the Rishima, an impression of God's energy and light. It's oxymoronic that anything can exist that is not being energized by the spark of God that is animating it. So this becomes, the Tzimtzum is going out. And this is left as an empty space. And then we're told that God shone a ray of light into the middle of the vacuum. And this is represented by what science calls the Big Bang, this ray of light coming into the center point. And from that ray of light, all of the spiritual and physical worlds come into being, including tens of billions of galaxies, all came from this original ray of light into the middle point of the empty space. Now, there's a second way we could look at the Tzimtzum, which is exactly the opposite. It's as if all of this, if we can conceive, is the infinite, eternal light of God. And when the Tzimtzum occurs, what happens is, as it were, each of these triangles folds in to the middle point. Each one of them folds in, and so basically you get a triangle like this, a triangle like that, a triangle like this, and so forth. But they all meet in the center point. That becomes the contraction. And then all of this out here is empty, as it were. And then from that central point, God shines into all of this again, the whole creation process. So the Magen David is a very, very good visual for both of these metaphors. Each one of these metaphors has a deep, deep truth to it. And the whole idea of Tzimtzum, it affects us also. And it's a living reality. It's not just something that happened one time, a long time ago. Because if you look at the Tzimtzum as everything coming into the middle point, folding in. So this is what we call focus. This is what, for a human being, is when we want to accomplish something, we have to go through a process of contraction, of not letting the mind be here, there, and everywhere, and usually nowhere at all, by focusing our thought. That is Tzimtzum. The opposite metaphor is that when we want to accomplish something, we have to mitzamtzem all of the other plurality of energy and stimuli that could take us far afield and allows us to focus on what we want to get done by opening everything up and pushing everything to the side except that which we need to accomplish right now. So this metaphor of the Tzimtzum, like I said, is not just a one-time event that happens, but it is a constant part of our consciousness. Okay, so now let's go one more step here. And that is, again, looking at 7 as being a manifestation of 6 plus 1. Now, 6, I'm just trying to find my place here. 6 and 1 also relates to time and space, because we know that space is, in a sense, a expanding cube. In other words, space has 3 dimensions to it: height, width, and depth. But each one of them goes in 2 directions. You have height, and you have length, and you have width. And that is represented by a cube. As it were, the entire created universe is an expanding cube because space is expanding in every direction. Time, as Einstein revealed, is also conceived of a dimension, and time is what fills the inner area of the cube. Time, and we'll see also consciousness. But just for our purposes right now, trying to understand 6 and 1. So you have the 6 represent space, and inside is time or consciousness, because we're the ones who are conscious of the space around us. So the letter of 6 is Vav, and Vav equals 6. And that represents the 6 directions of space. But it also represents time, because we have a very unique phenomenon in the Torah that when you put the letter Vav, Vav means and. It's a connector. Even the shape of it is, there's the shape of the Vav right here. It's a line. And sometimes it's referred to as a person standing erect. Sometimes it is compared to a ladder, especially the ladder in Yaakov's dream, connecting heaven and earth. So in Hebrew, when you want to say and, it's the, and you put it before a verb or a noun. In the Torah, not modern Hebrew, this is unique to the Torah. When you put a vav before a verb, and the verb without the vav is in the past tense, the vav turns it into the future tense. And you read it as if this word or the passage or verse is happening in the future. And the opposite, if it's written in the future tense and you put a vav before it, you read it as if it's in the past. So this is a very mystical, paradoxical, mysterious idea, but it's given over that ultimately past, present, and future in a certain way are all happening at the same time. And we see this in science, that when matter is moving quickly through space, it affects time until you get to the speed of time where all time ceases to pass. These are very, very mystical, paradoxical ideas, but are confirmed in science. So when you put a clock on a spaceship, what they've done many times, and it's out there for days, weeks, months, and at this point for years, when it comes back, the clock has recorded different time, because time is not a constant. It depends on velocity and the speed of light, and its relationship between motion and light and velocity. So here again, the number 7 is special because it's in a sense already revealing this idea of what science calls the space-time continuum, the connection of time and space. And this is really getting to the mystical undertone of the divine cycle of 7. Now, we're told that for God, all of time is ever present. And we see that the 4 letters of God's name, well, there are actually 3 letters, that Hey repeats itself, that these 3 letters spell out Haya, was, Hoveh, is, Yiyeh, will be. And this we have in the well-known phrase, V'hu Haya, V'hu Hoveh, V'hu Yiyeh B'tifara, that God was, God is, and God will be in all of his glory, all of his beauty. So I just want to show you one last connection between 6 and 7, and that is in the mystical poem called Ana B'Koach. Ana B'Koach in most congregations is recited right after Lecha Dodi. Excuse me, right before Lecha Dodi on Shabbat. And this is a very, very mystical poem. By tradition, it was composed by Rabbi Nechunya ben Akana, going back 2,000 years ago. And it has in it the 42-letter name of God is secretly embedded in this poem. It's a very mystical poem. And I'm just going to show you the form of Ana B'Koach is there's 7 verses, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And each one is made up of 6 words, though. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Every single one of them only has 6 letters. And here you have the acronym of each of the letters. And this is encoded a 42-letter name of God. So here we see again the connection of 6 and 7, and the further connection to a very mystical name of God. And so all of this, when put together, is just alerting us to how important these cycles of 7 are. Because when you look at all 7 cycles, obviously we see a pattern here, a model. And of course, the 6 days of creation and the first Shabbat creates the basic model on which all cycles of time are formed, are based on. So we are going to continue in our next class, where we're going to take the number 7, and we're going to do a fairly quick survey of many, many places where the number 7 appears in relationship to Shabbat, to different holidays, different laws, different customs. And we'll see 7 over and over again. And some of these come from the Torah itself, and others were created by the sages, different rituals. But when they had to choose a number in which to represent a cycle, they chose the number 7 for obvious reasons. So this was our first class, and we will be continuing after the next class, where we explore the number 7. We will already hopefully start delving into Shabbat, and a good part of the rest of the series will be exploring Shabbat from the practical to the mystical, but especially how to connect in a deeper way to Shabbat and how to get the most out of it. So thank you for watching, and hopefully you will follow the rest of the series.